Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joanna Hannefeld. I am the acting vice president of the Robert Koch Institute, Germany's National Public Health Institute. I'm a member of GLORA, the German Research Alliance for Global Health Research, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon session about bridging policy and research, translating the EU Global Health Strategy into action. We have a little bit of an odd setup. We've got a great discussion. We're quite far from each other, but we'll bridge that in our... Exactly. Let me wave at you. But a warm welcome also to the people who are joining us online. We're a hybrid session. It's fantastic to be in a full room here at the World Health Summit. And it's fantastic to be here to discuss with colleagues in the field of global health research the impact that the new EU Global Health Strategy adopted by the Commission in 2022 will have or will not have on our collective research. GLORA, let me just very briefly outline what we'll be talking about and set the scene a little bit. GLORA is essentially a German research platform that was set up in 2020 to foster global health research in Germany. And it's doing that in two ways. One is to create a very vibrant community, and it's been incredibly successful at that. And then the perhaps even more important pillar is providing research grants, which are competitively won by German researchers in the field of global health. This is funded by the Ministry of Research here, and also later was funded a bit by the German Ministry for Development Cooperation. And it's been a sort of success story. And we're delighted to host this session. The 2022 strategy by the EU on global health was a change. For anyone working in global health, it marked really the arrival of the EU as a consolidated actor on the global health stage. And I know that from my position, I'm very interested to see what this will mean, how this is being operationalized in different ways, but also how this will affect research conducted by EU member states in other countries. And I think it's particularly relevant for anyone who works in global health, a discipline which has research and operations, or the implementation and implementation research alongside that, as the very sort of core of what we do, whether we're more operational or more research focused. So we've got a fantastic panel this afternoon to explore this from different perspectives. Really looking forward to it, and anything that is great never happens alone. So I have the pleasure of introducing my co-moderator, Kerstin Klipstein-Grobusch, who will introduce herself and take us into the session.
Thank you very much, Johanna, for the very short introduction. So I'm the Vice Chair of Global Health at the University Medical Center Utrecht in the Netherlands. I'm also a member of GLORA, despite actually being based in the Netherlands. But I'm also on the executive board of the European Global Health Research Centers Network, EQUIN. And we are today then co-hosting together with GLORA this session. So what is EQUIN? We are a network of leading global health research institutions in Europe, and we are promoting and advocating for global health research and innovation. And for this, we facilitate and strengthen equitable collaboration among the network's initiatives and their global partner. We do have a very special focus on strengthening global health research infrastructures in order to increase our knowledge base to improve people's health. And in that regard, we've been working over the years very closely with the League of European Research Institutions on thematic issues to raise the profile of global health within the EU, with a focus also on advocating, for example, for EU research funding directed towards global health. We also advocate on the EU Global Health Strategy, and I think today's session is a very good example for that. We've also been able to be introducing EQUIN at the ACME conference in Utrecht last November, and we've been publishing then some opinion pieces then also in this regard. Now, for our joint German Alliance for Global Health Research and EQUIN workshop today, called Bridging Policy and Research, Translating the EU Global Health Strategy into Action, We are very happy to have an esteemed panel then this afternoon. And I would like to take the opportunity to first introduce our speaker, Kasia Jurczak, and I hope I spelled that correctly here. She's the head of the unit Combating Diseases at the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation, and in that capacity providing strategic steer for the funding available for health research and innovation under the Horizon Europe project. And we would be very happy to hear from you an opening statement on the topic. What's your perspective on the EU strategy, and how should this affect the EU and national research and development agendas?
Well, good afternoon. I feel very much I'm in the hot seat because I'm here on the table as the only speaker with the two co-chairs. So they will be giving me a sign if I go over the time limit, and I'll be waving to friends on the other side of the room to call your friend and for them to take any questions I'm not able to answer. So Kasia Jurczak, head of unit in DG RTD. In my role, I've been in the research research innovation family of the Commission for the last 3.5 months. But I think what's interesting for our panel is that in my previous life, for the last 5 years before that, I was advising the European Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs. And there I was advising him on health emergencies and global health issues. And I understand I have a silent permission from the co-host to give you a little bit of the background of how the global health strategy came about in the run-up to adoption in 2022. So the strategy itself is a labor of cooperation between many mothers and fathers. We have at the helm of it, of course, our health commissioner, Stelia Kyriakides, and Commissioner Ulpilainen for international partnerships. And I think both of them either have been present here through video message or in person, and definitely in the past years as well. But as always, all the other policy strands come in. So for research and innovation as well, for humanitarian affairs, and for all the various commission services. And I think what's really important is to understand the origin of the global health strategy is long awaited. And I think really the motivator and the catalyst for it was the pandemic, right? I mean, there is something positive, definitely, that came out of the pandemics. At the EU level, we have reflected on the level of our preparedness and have adopted the European Health Union for kind of bringing the response at the EU level closer. But of course, the global dimension is equally important, and that global dimension comes with the global health strategy, right? So we say it's the counterpoint to what we are doing in Europe, and focuses our attention for the outside. Because, as was the slogan, and not only, I mean, it was a reflection of reality, the global threats know no borders, so our preparedness and response has to be global. But I think there's also another element that perhaps in the global health research we don't talk so much about, that the adoption of health strategy also had its origin at geostrategic, geopolitical considerations. Because during the pandemic we understood, okay, viruses travel, but also the links between the countries are being tested. In terms of, for example, production of medicine. Some countries were deciding to stop the production and export of some critical compounds within their national boundaries. We saw many critical medicine shortages or compounds shortages in that time in Europe, and we understood that global health is a matter of diplomacy as well. And I see that we actually, within the conference, within the World Health Summit, we do have a session on G7 and G20 global diplomacy on health. So for me, coming in from the research perspective, our program, Horizon Europe, is a global program. It is a program which is open to partners on the basis of reciprocity. So if you work with us, if you open your funding to us, we open our funding to you, but also takes into account our strategic interest and stops at research subjects that perhaps should not be shared with all the partners in the world. So I think this, both the global health aspect and the pure research and public health, should really always be remembered in the context also of the strategic interests and our external policy. And if you read the opening of the global strategy, it really says the global health issues are of geostrategic importance for Europe and help us build partnerships with third countries. So maybe allow me last element of this big picture, yes, which is the Global Gateway. And Global Gateway, it's also a flagship initiative of the Commission, which promotes investment agenda in third countries. And many of these investments, I think around 50%, are in the area of health. And one notable example I'd like to bring is the MAF Plus, so that's the vaccines manufacturing plant in South Africa that looks at the joint investment from the EU, the member states, and cooperation with our African counterparts on health. And while it's investment in manufacturing, research and development is a crucial part of it, because our cooperation on research development not only helps to create the infrastructure for research, gives pathways for academic engagement, for professional development, for local researchers, and it also helps us to harmonize or bring closer the regulatory ethical frameworks, bring closer between the African region, but also between Europe and Africa, allowing for better cooperation on the issues in between the two continents. So what I wanted to paint, it was really high-level picture of how it came about, taking into importance the public health considerations, geostrategic considerations, and also investment and research and development agenda. So for the first question, I hope that could be it.
Yeah, very interesting, and many follow-up questions to come. No, but it's fantastic to hear that, and of course, Horizon for many of us who do research in this room is a key resource of funding. So let me turn now to a national actor, and I'm delighted to introduce and ask her in a way the same question, Veronika von Messling, who is the DG for Life Sciences so far away in our ministry, in our federal ministry for education and research, and she's been there since 2018. But this is really a significant pot of funding. Sorry to be so direct, in the life sciences in Germany, but I think really also in Europe. And I think you've had an impact as a person, and in that role, quite substantial, I think, on all of the areas of global health and public health that we'll be discussing and that we in the room have been researching. So I'd be really interested to know what your perspective is in terms of the EU strategy. How does that influence you and the type of initiatives you support, and how do you see that, especially going forward, influencing implementation?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm always a little overwhelmed by what people think that we can do, because but nonetheless, I think that what Kasia said very much resonates with us. So we are exactly looking at it from the other side. There's a premise for especially in global health, where we have realized a long time ago already that to solve these global problems, we need to team up. It's not very sensible if there is a German initiative to develop an Ebola vaccine, and then there is maybe a French and a British initiative to do the same thing. That it is much smarter if we all get together and organize ourselves to do this together. And I think that's the rationale why we invest since quite a long time in these product development partnerships, and why we are active members in all kinds of international consortia that tackle different aspects of these big problems. At the same time, we're a national funder in a country that's an EU member. And so we are delighted that so the EU, that's us, even though, of course, whatever is bad in Germany is obviously the fault of the EU, like in any other country. The truth is that this is the strategy that's been developed by the EU. We have contributed to that, and it reflects very much what we are hoping to achieve as a big player in the global context, and it addresses many things that we could not address as well from a national point of view. So for us, it is really important to have this aspect of collaboration what we realize, and what I think the agenda reflects also very well, is the importance of cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary collaboration if you want to actually bring solutions to those problems. And again, you need the expertise, and part of our national funding is to support experts in specific fields to do their best work. But then the next level on top of that is we have to bring these best works together to then add up to a solution that will influence then health either in Europe or in Germany or elsewhere in the world. And so that program, the EU program, is an ideal platform and an ideal environment to integrate these national efforts into efforts in other European countries, but also gives us this gateway. This gateway works both ways. So it gives us also a gateway to international collaborations, that we are not so interested in having individual collaborations, let's say Germany with one country. But it is for us much more attractive to have a collaboration from the EU with a group of other countries. At the same time, for us, we have learned, and I think that the EU document also reflects this very strongly, that we want to be honest partners. If we want to find solution in other countries, we can find it by partnering with the researchers or the actors in these other countries. And we have to do that at eye level. We can't come and say, oh, we know what's best, even though that's what Germans do best, right? Because we always kind of, well, in Germany, this is how it is to be done. And obviously that's how the rest of the world should do it. But the truth is, we've moved beyond that. And I think GLORA is a very good example for that. This idea that we need to have transdisciplinary consortia to then, and if we want to address really impactful, or if we want to move impactful change, we need to work with the target where we want to bring the change to, and that can be somewhere in Germany or somewhere else in the world. And I think the EU framework actually provides a lot of starting points for exactly these thoughts, and a lot of the EU programs, like for example EDCDP, are incorporate exactly that spirit. And so we are quite delighted about what's in the framework and what we can do with it.
I'm going to ask one tiny follow-up question. This is, are you going to make a different decision about funding or supporting initiatives now that there is a EU strategy on global health?
Yes and no. So yes, of course we will. So often we look if the funding that we provide puts our German researchers in a pole position for those EU funding opportunities. So it's not about taking money away because now there is money in Europe. It is more about how can we design our calls such that our research community then in this European competition is in a really good position. So that's why yes and no.
Thank you very much. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Professor Dr. Isabelle Richard. She is the director of the School of Public Health at the University of Rennes in France. So we now take you to France. And she is also Dean of the Schools of Public Health. She's a member of the board of the network of Francophone public health schools since some time. She has a lot of experience if it comes to not only public health, disability studies, medical education, but also to health administration and policy making. And in this regard, we are very interested and also to hear from you. So what your perspective from a French point of view potentially is on the EU strategy and how this should be how this should affect EU and then in this case the national R&D agenda in France.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I think the EU strategy states very clearly its objectives to improve global health security and deliver better health. This is, of course, relevant, and it also quotes key enablers of the strategy, research and health workforce. I think this means very clearly that we need more research, specifically in some fields. Emergency preparedness, of course, and as you said just before, that was more or less what drove the strategy in 2020, but also health inequalities and health policies in order to take into account the action verb deliver and make things really happen. And among these health policies, we need to include education policies to have a skilled workforce and labor market policies. If you look together at the EU strategy and at the other framework, the Horizon Europe strategy, and the Horizon Europe strategy mentions two problematics which I think we should pay much attention to in the field of global health, which is, and it has been also already extensively discussed in this forum, maybe it's the reason to be for this forum, the need to translate science into policymaking. And also the necessity to have more input from social sciences and humanities in the field of global health. And I'm not quite sure, at least in France, that we are presently taking all the necessary steps in order to deal with both issues, transferring science to policy and true interdisciplinarity. If we look at the translation from science to policy, I think, in fact, what we lack, at least in our labs and universities in France, is translators. It was one of the points of the Glora side event yesterday, and one of the discussions was, should research programs be assessed through their ability to produce policy briefs or to publish in the Lancet? And of course, the answer was both. But even if the answer is both, I am not sure that the same people are competent to do both. And I really think that in the field of global health, we absolutely need in our research labs what I would call translators or knowledge brokers, people with a background in media, in political science, in journalism, in order to succeed in translating our research results into a language policymakers can understand. And I am not sure that we are going to get our colleague researchers to do that work, because I'm not sure they have the competencies to do it, while other people probably have. If we look more closely at the French strategy, as far as the main research thematics are concerned, it's fairly in line with the European strategy. For instance, the National Strategy for Global Health includes the aim of better coordination of global health research. And that's one of the reasons why we were very interested in the German Glora initiative, and we're trying to replicate it in a somehow different way, bringing together French institutions involved in global health research. France has recently launched large priority research programs, one in emergency preparedness, with two branches, one for emergent diseases and one for zoonotic diseases, with, of course, a link in a One Health approach. And will soon launch a large research program on prevention. And clearly, we can see that this rings the bell in accordance to the European priorities. Maybe as a final word, I would like to, and maybe because the school I am the director of trains health administrators and civil servants, I would like to draw the attention to the question of health workforce, which is, I think, maybe not getting the attention it deserves from researchers. From policymakers it is, but from researchers I'm not sure. Health workforce shortage is increasingly recognized as the bottleneck which may jeopardize a number of our initiatives. And this is also a research issue, and I think our global health teams should include specialists of labor market, economics and policy, and of education issues in order to tackle this question. In summary, I think the key sectors for global health research are correctly targeted, both by the European strategy and that our French strategy is fairly in line, but that progress is still needed to develop a real interdisciplinary approach and also to translate our results in a language policymakers can effectively use.
Thank you. So very important addition there around the translation of research and I think very positive voices from the national level in Germany and in France. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our fourth panelist for today, Filomena Apico. She heads the health portfolio at the European Centre for Development and Policy Management. And I guess we've been talking a little bit about the EU Global Health Strategy. So by virtue of that, it's a EU strategy that engages with countries outside of the EU, and the Global Health Research portfolio that we have spoken about obviously has a footprint somewhat on the African continent. I asked Filomena what her heritage was. It involved many countries, but they were all but one were on the African continent. So Filomena, that's a lot to load on one person to say what's your perspective from the outside of that. But from a non-EU member state, I'd be really interested in your view.
No, thank you so much, Johanna. And the other speakers, so you've sort of set the tune for me to actually comment on this. For me, as you rightly say, the EU Global Health Strategy is a welcome move by the EU, I would say, to really renew its political commitment towards global health. I don't need to tell anyone what happened during COVID. Everyone knows the lack of trust that was around EU and Africa as partners, around the sharing of vaccines. Even now with Mpox, we see a similar trend. So there's still a lot of, I would call it cautious optimism as to the health partnership and how it can develop. And for me, when it comes to research and development, if you look at the Global Health Strategy, you have guiding principle 5. So 5 out of 20, not bad, right? So if I'd say to you, give me 5 principles of the GHS, at least you'd have covered health and innovations. That's good. But then it's here focusing a little bit on really bring about a conducive research environment, but also supporting health research. And when you look at the list of actions, it even gets more interesting because then it looks at the international research and cooperation. So of course, Africa being a key partner of the EU, supporting end-to-end research, which I have reservations about, and then of course, building the capacity. So from, as you've heard from both Veronica and Isabel, there's alignment with the EU strategies. I would say from an African point of view, and actually in preparation, asked African researchers, are you aware of the EU Global Health Strategy? Not surprising, not many were. The ones who were of course, South Africa, where they have a bigger research component in Africa. I even went back and said, do you then know that Germany has a global health strategy, that France has a global health strategy? Netherlands, where I work, also has one. And they were like, no, we're not. And to that extent, it just showed to me that, okay, we have all these different strategies ongoing, but what is the added value to a partner country who's looking to support their research and innovation? And for me, also, what's interesting is much as both the German and the French health strategies prioritize research and development, how are they going to work together with the EU? So it's one thing to list it, but what will be the modus operandi for you to work together? Because when you speak to African public health officials or even Africa CDC, they told me, yeah, you have all these different people coming to you with the same funding for the same issue. So rather, because of the limited capacity of African countries to deal with multiple partners, it's better if there was a more concrete approach when approaching Africa for the same thematic. So how is Germany, France, Netherlands, Sweden, together with the EU, coming together to offer sort of a package on research and innovation? But for me also, I even take it a little bit further. When you look at the partner countries, the reality is not so many countries invest in R&D. So when the EU is offering its support to a member state through its delegation, there's a list of priorities. And not often is research and development on those lists. Maternal health, universal health coverage, in some countries, HRHR will take preference over R&D. So it's a strategy to me really incentivizing countries to say, oh, the EU is giving funding for research and development. Should we add it to a priority list? If there's no capacity in the country to conduct the research, it may not make the priority list for a country. And that's the reality of it. And even when it comes to issues around, let's say, the supporting the whole research and innovation end to end, I think we've had the best example, EDCT P3. That is the clinical trial, but I don't hear as often about the discovery phase and how is EU supporting that phase of, the whole production line. So for me, I would say cautious optimism on what the EU can do in research and innovation from partner country. there are positives to it, but I think a lot more needs to be done to translate these commitments into practice for African countries.
Thank you very much, Philomena. Many sort of things, food for thought there. Kasia, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to say, okay, so we have the strategy, and that is an achievement. It came out of a specific historic moment. So how will resources now be mobilized for its implementation, specifically for R&D? And actually, I'm going to take a little bit of what Philomena said and to add to that question and say, so we've also heard around this sort of ecosystem or the processes around R&D that you need to bid for that together. So how is the resourcing going to happen, or how are those processes gonna take place?
Okay, so maybe I can also pick up on some comments from the previous speakers. I think it's just emphasizing the point that Veronica made. There's the EU, it's member states. Because the member states contribute to the EU budget, they top up initiatives for certain programs like Horizon Europe. So we do this work very much jointly. The Commission adopted the communication on the global health strategy, but it was the Council, so the member states together, who issued Council conclusions a year and a half later saying what are their commitments and points on that strategy. And they endorsed the strategy. So it's not just the faceless Brussels bureaucrat doing this, it's all your ministries of health coming together to say, yes, we agree with that strategy and we'll take it forward in our national programming. So I think that's a very important point to highlight. So the strategy, it's new, but it's also coming up to 2 years since its existence, and like a good policy process, it has a implementation review built in. So that implementation review will take place next year. And I think organizations such as yours are very well placed, networks such as yours are very well placed to provide your advocacy message and to say what works, what's not working. So I hope some of the information and the views from the audience today will help you orient your position for that. And linked to that review process, it's not a review process, it's implementation, report on the implementation, will be also a global health forum organized next year in most likely in Brussels. Mm-hmm. So there is a process, a policy process around it, which I think is welcome. I would also like to come back to the point on trust, and I think it's a very, very fair point. So that in the aftermath of COVID-19, there was a lack of trust, and the EU-Africa relationship perhaps was affected by that. But as you said, Africa is the privileged partner for Europe in terms of our research and innovation work. We have an EU-AU, so European Union and African Union investment agenda, where public health has been agreed as a priority area. And South Africa, of course, it's at the pole in terms of that cooperation, but also other countries. And apart from that formal high-level strategy, we have many partnerships that are disease-specific or group-specific that are also global. And when I say we, it's of course Commission, but of course also the member states. So we have GLOPIDAD, which is the partnership on infectious diseases, where also participation of France and Germany there. We have a Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases, where as well the EU member states and all of you but me so far referred to EDCTP3 or EDCPT Association, which has 15 EU member states and I think 29 African states, right? And I think models like that are a model that can help us build a blueprint for more equitable partnerships between EU and Africa, and a way of true cooperation. There was a reference to lack of translation of science to policy. I think one of the great achievements of the EDCPT is the fact that not only research is being done there, but that investment in capacity. And I hear from colleagues engaged in the association that many of the senior epidemiologists who were advising African governments during COVID were actually like graduates of fellowships funded by the EDCPT association. So I think that's a huge plus. So it's both the hardware of research and the infrastructure, but the software, that capacity and that recognition and investment in the current and the future wave of research leaders. Voilà. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kasia, also for highlighting many of the successful initiatives like EDCDP, but also the Chronic Alliance for Chronic Disease Program. Now, Philomena, she actually spoke about now, if I'll said to people about, are you aware of different global health strategies, the European one, the German one, the French one, the Swedish one, the Dutch one, that very often people are not so much aware, and that they are also saying there are many initiatives out there, but sometimes it's a bit difficult to understand how are those different initiatives and also linked to each other. And with this, I would then like to ask Veronica to comment on that from a German ministry perspective as well, how to ensure that also overall the alignment is shown very well and makes it easy also for people, for colleagues, for policymakers to understand the added benefit of national and European global health strategy.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting perspective, because I think it's a question of who is it addressed to. And this global health strategy that, for example, the German global health strategy is something that I always perceived as being addressed to a strategy of the German government, but it's not for any other country. It is how we work out what the priorities, or an agreement on what priorities will be. So if I look at somebody else's global health strategy, it's maybe to get inspiration for our global health strategy, but not to ask, well, how can I be a part of their strategy in a sense? So, but I think it's a justified question. I never looked at it that somebody from a perspective that somebody would say, well, how can I be a part of this strategy? So, but it's a good point. So I think this is another way to look at that. Yeah, so I think the question about the alignments, yeah, it's very clear there's not going to be more money. So we have to pack the bull by the horns. That means we have to do as much as we can with the money that we have. So it is a very logical point to say, how do we make sure everything is aligned, that we don't duplicate and in a way waste resources. So I would like to differentiate there, because in basic research, when it's in the discovery area, some diversities which could be considered duplication is actually valuable, because it provides opportunity for discovery. If we very early on streamline this process, we also limit an opportunity to get funding for an idea, because like if it's all kind of in one track and you have an idea that's a little bit out there, you can't get any funding. So there is an advantage in having a bit of, let's say, I think in having these EU money and German money and maybe money from a foundation or maybe money from some regional donor for this basic research, to make sure that maybe also an out there idea has an opportunity to be explored. Because very often, I mean, if you had asked me before the pandemic, which company or where will we get a vaccine for the next pandemic, I would have named you 3 actors, none of which actually came through. So the truth is that the pandemic, I find, has really shown to us that solutions for those problems come out of unexpected corners. And in retrospect, to reconstruct how this happens is another thing. But it means in basic research, we need to have room for discovery. And that also means we have to have all these different funding pots that someone can apply for to get support to explore their ideas. This changes when it comes to development. When there is something and it is supposed to be implemented, then it's completely different. Then there's huge value in pooling resources. And by taking the risk of repeating myself, these product development partnerships are, from our perspective, really something uniquely effective in navigating this very complicated and very frustrating process of product development in the medical space, which is fraught by failures and frustrations. And so there has to be, so all the resources we have to concentrate to get one or two products across the finish line, and because at the end, if I don't get it across the finish line, then if I don't have anything, then I cannot talk about access, I cannot talk about who should get it first and all this. First, I have to have it. And that takes all the energy and all the money we have, because it's a hugely arduous process at the moment. So there, we are strongly committed from a German perspective to work together, and the EU offers to us an easy access and to achieve critical mass, but by no way exclusive. A lot of the PDPs we invest in have the EU, have member states, but also have states from outside or countries from outside the EU invest towards this common goal. And I think one does not exclude the other, and that is not duplication. Does it make it complicated when you look at it from the outside? Absolutely yes, but it's a bit of a mosaic. So if you look at it, you will see the picture. It's just of many pieces, and I'm very, or not me, we are very much in favor of that mosaic, of making that extra effort, because it really pays off. Because if you have it all homogeneous, the risk of essentially running homogeneously in the wrong direction is huge. Having a more mosaic, then like if one of the areas is fading, maybe another area, the color is getting stronger. And that opportunity that is something that we really, really need, not just in global health, but anyway in this research and development space. So that's why I'm kind of advocating for not thinking everything is in competition or it's too complex. Yes, we always have to ask, does it need extra complexity? And the answer often is no. But in terms of trying to homogenize or harmonize everything, is also risking of losing out, of leaving open flanks, and I don't think we want that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Veronica. And I was wondering whether our speakers, and also on your table, but very far away from us, may like to comment then on Veronica's thoughts.
Well, maybe from a French perspective, I think the underlying question to whether funding is open to partners or not is usually, is it our strategic interests or not? Is there reciprocity, and will we get something for it? And in the field of global health, I think really the answer is much more often yes than no. And that it's quite obvious for emerging diseases, for instance, but it's quite obvious, but it doesn't always translate into policy. And for instance, if you look at the French priority program on emerging diseases, it does not allow funding for partners, which we were working with before. And the funding for partners can be available through development policy funding, but both research and development policy are in two silos and don't discuss with each other very much, although probably participating in research programs is an excellent way of building capacity. And it's true for emerging diseases, but it's true for a number of other global health issues. If you look, for instance, at the question of the impact of climate change on health, or on the question again of health workforce shortage, presently knowledge is being created in the global south because they are faced with the problem in advance of us, and not collaborating is just a lose-lose strategy. I don't know if lose-lose is the opposite of win-win, but and it's just not serving our interests not to cooperate in these fields. And I think that there would really be a great interest in bringing together our development strategies and our research strategies.
And Philomena, can I ask you a little bit differently? You put the issue of trust on the agenda, and I think it's really good, and also the role research plays in trust. So I'm going to ask you a little bit differently. If you could advise us in the room, and it's especially the colleagues who are in these powerful funding positions, really, how can we use the implementation of this strategy to build that sort of trust amongst the colleagues who haven't heard of our global health strategies or who are not aware of the EU strategies? What do you think would make a difference?
That's a very good question. I think we can't underestimate some of the gains that have already been made. For example, under the Belgian presidency, I really did see a move to bring health discussions. There was a trip that was made to Addis, a Team Europe initiative, or a Team Europe trip, that was made to Addis early on in February, and then there was a follow-up high level in Brussels, and then in March at another event. So within one presidency, I saw movement under a thematic more than in any of the other thematics of the EU partnership. And I mentioned some that are old but still contentious, like migration, for example. So it takes that coalition of the willing to really want to move something and to really respect the African counterparts, to dialogue together with them, frank discussions. And it's not always that it's rosy, sometimes it's like you're a partner, but then when it comes to IEP, you're no longer a partner. We discuss in the room, we're going to support you. We go to the World Health Assembly, you have another story. So sometimes it's about frank discussions and saying, how can we work together on this contentious issue? And then the other one would be as well to also work with other stakeholders. I think research is a brilliant thematic because you don't only have the politicians, but you also have academics. You also have researchers, think tanks who can join this thematic to really make it more meaningful in the partnership. And I think with the EU Research Innovation Agenda, that's what they did. They were able to have this at ministerial level, but also a really big conference, bringing in different researchers, academia, really to set the priorities for what the innovation agenda would look like. So these are maybe some good examples that I can bring up.
Great, thank you.
Oh, and the last one, of course, policy coherence. You can't agree on something in health and then use trade to go backwards on it. Say, and the health partnership will work with you to develop new vaccines, but in WTO we're going to go with something alongside TRIPS and things like that. So policy coherence, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, the policy coherence is, of course, important with regard to national collaboration, but also with regard to multinational collaboration. And that is then also on the EU's agenda. So you already touched also upon working multi-sectoral, also working on equal level, promoting sustainable partnerships. So that is something that is in the EU strategy. It is in the national strategies. I was wondering, how can we live up to it? And maybe that's first of all my question then to Kasia.
Yeah, I think, those on the equal partnership side, I think we also have to look at it from the incentives at the very level of execution of the research, right? And I think, so then I turn the question a little bit back and I say, I think it's really for you as leaders in global research, promoting the model. And here I don't know if there is a certain standard that could be developed or a good practice, that we look at those collaborations and we say, look, working with partner researchers in partner countries, they should not be just used for recruiting subjects for the study, right? The equal partnership should go further than that. It should be about the governance of the research project, so their insight and leadership and knowledge of the local context should be visible from the inception of the study, also to the manuscript write-up and the scientific publication, right? That the authors are mentioned or equal footing. It's not with thanks to in the footnote or the reference. So to recognize that people with whom we work in our partner countries or work, they're best placed to contextualize and localize the research design and give them the credit in the publication and in the governance of projects. So I don't know, just an idea. If there is such a guidelines, if there is something that you as a network could take up and promote, perhaps that could be the way forward. In terms of because I believe at the EU level it would be very difficult to push that. Of course, we can put it in aspirational terms, but how you really deliver the project once you get the funding, it's the principal investigator, it's the consortia that are being formed, right? That's
okay,
well, okay. I put you on the spot now.
You put me on the spot, and it's good you put me on the spot because I feel quite passionate about this.
Okay.
So, we are definitely, this is something that is absolutely to the core of the GLORA mandate. I imagine also your research network.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely. However, there's software and hardware. The
Okay.
software is how we behave as PIs. The hardware is that there are still very hard mechanisms, and I've just heard the French affirm it, that certain funding calls are not open to partners from other countries, and we can physically not transfer money. And if I'm honest, I'm not quite PI on as many grants I wish I was, but on some, this does affect the partnerships that we have. And as such, we are the implementers of your strategy. So the same question, sorry, just on the equitable partnerships, I think interdisciplinary research, you've recognized the importance. You've recognized the importance of equitable partnership. But how far do you think in the implementation of the strategy, Germany and France, Veronica and Isabel, how far do you think we're going to be able to push that we can move some of these hardware mechanisms of transferring funding from our institutions to research partners in the South, or to have, for example, calls that are open PI-wise for partners from the South, for example, under the umbrella of an EU strategy? I mean, I think those sort of things, everything you've said, I agree. And we will do that as GLORA. I put our hands up, promise, I can say we will do this. But I would be really keen to hear from the two national partners if you think that's feasible and how far you think we would come in 3 years. Veronica and then Isabel, please.
So we have one program, right, where we do that. And I think I actually have to commend my colleagues who are in the audience to dig through all this red tape and find a way to have African PIs be funding recipients of a German funding mechanism, or of German money. And I think that was for us, or this project RISA, it's called, is a huge learning opportunity because we have to remember we are talking about taxpayers' money here. And that means for me to make an argument that I take somebody's tax money and give it to a German researcher, that's already hard enough, believe it or not, right? Because there's lots of other things where our constituents feels that their taxes should be spent on. Once we argue that this money is given to outside the country, it becomes even more difficult. Which doesn't mean that it cannot be made, but just to explain why it seems to be not so easy. Because the other way around also doesn't work. So in which countries do I, as a German researcher, am eligible to apply for funding? Probably not in many African countries, not in many South American countries, not in Canada. In the US, yes. So this reciprocity, it goes both ways. So the same way that other systems are closed up because they are national funding systems, so is ours. And this is why to close the loop, this is how it is. Now, if we know what we want to achieve, the question is how can we do it? So us trying this and learning from this is one way. We also really, really look at the EU mechanisms for that, because there is, again, and Kasia is right, this has to be a decision that a certain program is opened up. But especially EDCTP is, I think, on the European level, a similar learning experience. How do you partner? Because it's not just about partnership, it's also how do we partner to achieve that goal? And so the argument always has to be that this particular partnership or this particular role in a collaboration is crucial to achieve the goal that was set out for the program. And very honestly, we are all still learning about how to get this right, because this isn't quite so easy. Because, for example, with German money comes German accounting responsibilities. So many German researchers in the room know that this pretty much takes a whole department to fulfill those requirements. So our African colleagues that we want to actually be contributing to this funding, how do we also empower them to fulfill these all these requirements and not just then be completely occupied with doing that and not doing any research anymore? So there's a lot of, on the first glance, it's like, well, that can't be so difficult. And I agree with you. The difficulties that are intrinsic to that should be overcome. But I'm just trying to explain that this if we want to get it right, it requires us to go stepwise and to get experience. And this is why I think I'm very excited about the program that we have. I'm also excited that the EU is having certain programs and exploring that. And I think ultimately, as we move forward, this is going to get more clearly defined which type of partnership is beneficial to the success of the program. And that is what's going to drive that, because our funding is research funding. It is not developmental aid. And so for us, it's how do we achieve the goal of the program? And so the arguments are a little different from somebody who says, well, I really need some capacity building. So this is not mutually exclusive. It's just a different way to look at this. And I think we are at many levels working this out, but we are by no way at a point where we can say, yeah, no problem, sorted that. So I think we need to all work together on finding ways to get this done and to be honest about it. So to not have these odd suggestions, oh, yeah, we'll do everything for you to also do this. It has to be clear which is the role to achieve the program, and what kind of environment do we need to create for our partner to fulfill this role.
Yeah. Okay, so Isabel, before I ask you to comment, Kasia, I wanted to come back in.
I just wanted to have a small comment on that, because we are talking about funding from national sources, right? National research sources, partnerships with maybe African countries. I was wondering, and that's both for French and German colleagues here, would it be possible to fund a clinical trial from your national funding, public funding? Would it be possible to fund a clinical trial between 2 EU member states? And I think it's not that evident. No, not in all countries. So I just wanted to say that even in Europe, looking at the national level of research and innovation funding for clinical research across 2 countries, we can, of course, come with European money. But many of the national sources of funding have this kind of administrative difficulties to justify spending on research within Europe between two member states, right? It's not as easy to do it in Europe, and it could be infinitely more difficult to do it between a European country and an African country or a third country anywhere in the world. So I'm just saying as Veronica was saying, it's step by step, and we have to start really close to home to make this possible. Of course, with European funding, there is we can help some of that, and everybody's quoting EDCTP as a great example, and it is a great example. I think we should come up also with a T-shirt we love. We love this partnership because it's a really good practice. So that was it. Sorry for taking the floor.
No, thank you very much, and I agree to that. But I would also want to put out there is that yes, we partner to achieve a goal, but it's also the funders then really being in the driver's seat to also setting some of the conditions for how we work together and how that working together can then also be financially supported. So yes, there's a lot of responsibility then on the individual researchers, the PIs, but it is also that it's important for funders to recognize their own ability to contribute to change.
Isabel, maybe you want to comment?
Yes, I think maybe one of the ideas could be not to put it as a question of equity, but to put it as a question of self-interest. I think it is in the interest of European citizens and of European taxpayers that African colleagues get as soon as possible results on arthropod-borne diseases, because mosquitoes don't really care on the nationality of the human person they are going to sting. They only care on climate and temperature. And there are a number of topics, especially in the field of global health, where financing programs that will help African colleagues get research results is not a question of equity, it's a question of self-interest. And that can be probably differently explained to our fellow citizens as to what happens with their taxes. I think a second question indeed is capacity building in research administration. It's not that I'm really convinced that being an expert of French, German, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese research bureaucracy is going to make the life of our African colleagues really much more exciting. But nevertheless, a number of programs are limited in their implementation, not by the scientific knowledge of our African colleagues, but by the capacity of their institutions to deal with large budgets and be accountable for it. And probably if our rules in some way converged between European countries, it would make life easier for us and for our partners. And maybe a third point, even if I know it's not always politically correct, is to say that maybe Europe should try and take more advantage of multilingualism. Because for a number of partner colleagues in Africa, working in English is not that easy. And in fact, we don't work in English, we work in some kind of low-level Globish, which is not necessarily really very friendly and does not always allow high-level discussions. And I think Europe could take more advantage of different networks, of Hispanophone networks, of Lusophone networks, of the connections, for instance, between the Portuguese colleagues, the Brazilian colleagues, between us and the Francophone African countries and so on, because it would make some partnerships easier.
And maybe we just ask Philomena to comment on that last point also, the language, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So think of your question.
No, I completely agree with Isabel. We are a continent of 55 member states, with vast languages. So you're right. Sometimes you find brilliant researchers who were trying to express themselves in the language of the publisher, be it English or sometimes it could be French, and you're from an English-speaking African country, and then it's a bit difficult. Also, the opportunities to publish in these journals, if you cannot write proper French or proper English, then you're limited in that. But perhaps maybe just out there, since the African Union itself has recognized Swahili as one of its official languages, this is a language that is spoken at least throughout Eastern, a bit of Central, and moving a little bit towards Southern Africa. So perhaps you can start to think about how this language could be a language of publishing in the future. Maybe just food for thought.
Great, and I think we've already had quite a bit of controversial discussion here, but it's great to open it up to the floor. So there's a roving mic. If you put your hand up, we'll take 3 questions initially and then distribute. If you could introduce yourself as you ask the question. I see one hand. I haven't seen the second one, but if you've seen a second one. Number 2. Number 2 and then number 3 there. We'll take those.
Thanks very much. My name is Philly Raftery and I work with the World Health Organization in Lyon, actually, in France. It's part of the work that I do as part of the WHO Health Emergencies Programme. So in terms of emergency preparedness and response, which is what I work on, we know obviously that research is critical to improve our emergency responses, and there's a lot of research that can only be conducted in the heat of the response. But historically this has been problematic because it deters maybe resources from the response if we want to do this research in the response. But I think after COVID, after Ebola, we've all come together and recognized that this is critical. So in terms of the EU global health strategy, the French, the German, the Dutch strategies, what mechanisms do you have in place to provide access to funding to be able to do that research in the heat of these responses? Thanks.
Okay. Very good, very clear question. And then number 2 is over here. And then we have the gentleman there.
Thank you, John Coughlin, International Cerebral Palsy Society. If I can ask 2 questions, if that's okay. The first one is about we're talking about strategies and research strategies, and what we see is when we're looking at the setting priorities in the research field, we have certain diseases which are top of the agenda. We know that, and quite rightly so. What we find, however, is that there are smaller constituencies, smaller conditions which don't get the attention that they need. And I wonder whether there's a need to think, when we're talking about research strategy, about how to target research in these sort of neglected areas, thinking about the fact that what happens is a lot of research funding is being spent on small-scale studies that are inconclusive because they simply don't have large enough cohorts, for example. And that setting priorities for these minor constituencies could also be a part of the strategy looking forward. So to take that research money and make it spent more efficiently in order to get to those actions at the end. And my second question would be looking at the adoption of the resolution at the World Health Assembly last year on social participation. The question was raised earlier about translation of research and whether you can see a role here for, in terms of strategy, for greater promotion of social participation in research as a key to making sure that policy and action follows, because there has to be a relationship between research conclusions and advocacy in order to actually turn those research conclusions into action. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, and then we have the gentleman here, in the front. If you,
Hello, so Nikhil Sudarshanan from the Technical University of Munich. So maybe a slightly controversial question. Of course, it's great that the EU now has a global health strategy, but it struck me that its emergence was from a realization that what happens over there can now come and affect us here. So should we interpret this to mean that global health, the EU global health strategy is really focused on things that can come back and affect Europeans in some form, either climate change in the future or infectious diseases? And how do we view this in the context of things like non-communicable diseases that may not actually make their way back over borders? Is there a scope in this to think about improving health in another country for that country on its own, or does everything need to be kind of framed in what are the benefits to the EU?
Okay, great. 4 very concrete questions. I'm going to try and do a good job at divvying this up. So I think I'm going to ask Kaja to respond first on the question: is there going to be an emergency window? Is there going to be a possibility for emergency research? And maybe you could also comment at the same time around the last question posed by the colleague from the TUM about what kind of message does this send?
Are we self-interested only?
Well, you paraphrase it. There you go. Obviously.
Thank you. On the first question on the research emergency window, under Horizon Europe, there is an emergency window available that had been mobilized during the COVID pandemic, and I think I have a colleague here who could help me remember. It was just within a few weeks' time that the funding was mobilized. So for Horizon Europe, it's really at the light speed. and more so that that window continues, and we have a possibility to use it in case of future emergencies as well. But not only COVID-19. So, for example, earlier this year we had emergency funding allocated for Mpox response and channeled, of course, through EDCTP for response in Africa. So, in terms of lessons learned also from the pandemic, we are working on a pandemic preparedness partnership, to have kind of an ever warm network that would allow us to do clinical trials during an emergency, and to actually have that possibility to respond very quickly. So that's an effort between the Commission and, of course, the member states, the funders, France, Germany included. And if you would like to know more, let me plug in a little ad for a workshop that will take place here tomorrow at 11, which is exactly about the issue of pandemic preparedness and various mechanisms and instruments that have been created in the COVID, pre-COVID, elaborated after COVID, looking at what have we learned in that time, and where we still have gaps and challenges. And on your last interesting, provocative question, I think let me just put on a former political aide hat, and I would say you always are ready to propose something that you care about, and you need to look at the political wind, how it blows. And I would say, if, yes, you're saying the response comes from preparedness, response to global health threat, which was, I think, a waking time for many of us and many governments. And I would not just say, oh yeah, we did it to self-prepare. No, but we used this opportunity and political openness it gave us to address 20 important questions that are not only about self-preparedness and kind of European-only position, but are really addressing also the delivery on the development goals, right? So I think that is something
Very
that
good.
you have plugged much more clearly in the opening.
Okay, so very good. It's about using that to position the issues that are important. And Philomena, I'm going to come to you next. I'm going to ask you about both. Is the perception outside that the EU Global Health Strategy is window dressing? There's a big consortium that is, and the second question maybe you could comment on is the importance of social participation in research.
Okay. No, these are good questions. I mean, maybe I'll start from the research, whether it's window dressing, the global health strategy. So I was speaking to some African researchers who do research on traditional medicines, things that are used by communities. And they were saying there's not so much interest in this kind of research. So where they see the funding go will be in this Horizon Europe for, clinical trials through the EDCTP, things like this, but not necessarily for, the community-based traditional medicines that could maybe be leveraged into real, therapeutics and solutions for the community where they live. So that's one. And then the other issue that was raised was, of course, yes, there is this partnership with the EU, but not so often is there also ways to link it to health policy research. So you have this clinical research without necessarily having also funding that goes towards the health policy research. And when you look at some of the African countries in context, you have to look at the social determinants of health. Why is an intervention not working as it should be in a given community? And if you don't have funding to go and maybe look at, is it poverty related? Is it drug abuse related? What are some of the issues around, it could even be nutrition. The medicine that is being given, you have to take 3 meals a day. You don't have money to buy 3 meals a day, so you won't take the medicine as you should be taking it. Things like this. So there's not a jointed opportunity for researchers to have that space when they sometimes see calls that are very purely clinical trial biomedical kind of research. Is it window dressing in a hole? I don't know. This is just one of the additional strategies that Africa sees the EU developing. I mean, I could speak even about just general. There's a strategy towards comprehensive strategy with Africa. Then you have member states having their own strategies. Then you move to the health field. You have the EU global strategy. Then you have member states also having their own strategies. So it's a proliferation of so many strategies that I think sometimes people are wondering what is the added value of all this. But I think maybe a little bit positive is to say that this time, at least from the African CDC and the AU, there's a recognition that at least the priorities in the global strategy are also in line with the African health strategy. maybe it's because the continent's one was in 2016 developed, and then COVID happened, and the trust issue happened, and then the EU strategy was developed afterwards. So at least they had a template with which to maybe reflect back in how priorities were developed. So window dressing, perhaps, but there's also opportunities for alignment. So I can't say 100% that it's just window dressing.
Okay, and Isabel, I'm going to ask you the question both around in France, is there emergency research that's possible? Is there an emergency window? But I wonder whether you could also comment on this balance. So if we create a research strategy that has these big mega problems as the main focus, how do we deal with not creating new neglected diseases in a way? I mean, put very flippantly, but how do we deal with the fact that we maybe, if we really say, okay, we need to throw everything in the kitchen sink at the big issue, then how do we have this, how do we look after the issues that are equally important but may not affect a huge number of our populations?
Maybe two different answers. First, as far as the French strategy is concerned, there is clearly a strategy, for instance, for emerging diseases that allows for emergency funding. And in fact, if you want emergency funding to be efficient, you also need to have a long-term strategy so that the infrastructures you are going to use are prepared. If you try and get colleagues to cooperate together, just when the emergency happens, it's not going to work. They need to know each other and to have worked with each other before. So financing emergency is also financing long-term collaboration on which you are going to be able to plug the emergency response. And it's been, for instance, explicitly financed and considered in the French strategy for emerging diseases. As for the question of how you take into account diseases which will not necessarily concern Europe, although maybe no one knows, some infrastructure, some funding of infrastructures can serve different issues. For instance, the funding of rapid sequencing in a number of partner countries serves for COVID, serves for other infectious disease, and can also serve for some neglected infectious disease. So sometimes by funding basic infrastructure, education infrastructures, research infrastructures, you will in fact help the partner countries in solving a number of issues and not just the ones you have funded the infrastructure for.
Okay, great. And Veronica, I call you the queen of emergency funding. I'm going to rephrase the question and say, what are your lessons learned on how to make this work? Isabel has already addressed this a bit.
Yeah, I think what Isabel says is exactly how we are looking at this. I think there's another little thing, and that's called no regret funding. So you have emergency funding, which is, I think, only useful if you know which entities are able to scale and to actually respond to that. And there is a different view from me as the researcher and from maybe me as the research funder on who could be the entities that might be able to perform. Mm-hmm. And so there will be people who would have also had a great idea but will not get anything because it's just not at the right combination. And it's not time because it has to be quick. And the other one is, we also want to enable people who have an idea to fund, but these are small grants, not long-lasting, to get people started, to give them funding so that they can start working on this, because we will need all minds on deck, so to speak, right? And we were very lucky to have this opportunity, to have this option to have a quick, making smaller amounts available, and then also have this more strategic long-term funding for certain infrastructures, for certain things. I think the big learning we all had is that if you want to be quick, be slow and don't get pressured too much. And that's really hard in the political arena, because all these crazy clinical trials that didn't give any results, what a waste, right? And so I think that will not happen again. So I think we all collectively, globally, everybody I talk to learned that no, just because some crazy person says that you should use some wormer to treat COVID, no, we shouldn't be doing that, right? I mean, I'm just saying. But that is certainly an area where these clinical trial networks are going to be instrumental, that you have a process and say, okay, which therapeutic approach, which vaccine approach is promising, what are the criteria that we use to say yes promising, no promising, and then this is where the money goes, and these studies are being done, and if you want to do clinical studies, get into this group and get into this dynamic and then do this. And I think that is probably one of the big learnings about that, because I think there we can really do much better than we did. I think the British were really well set up, and because they were set up before, and they used their system, and I think they were the ones who ultimately delivered the trials that supported certain things. And I think that is certainly, the other one is to think about funding, to think about how we bring the academia industry collaboration in this context. So in the pandemic, that was really fortuitous. So somehow those industries or pharmaceutical companies and the academics really kind of got around this by themselves and actually worked together quite efficiently. And we are obviously looking at that and see how can we make sure that this is not just by chance, but rather that what can we put in place for that to always work, and how can we even make it work better in areas where it maybe didn't work so well. But overall, it was surprising how well that worked. And I would like to pick up on that question of social participation, because that's the important one when it comes from vaccine to vaccination, but also way before. So there's a bit of, I think the Anglo-Saxon world has been leading this in terms of how you have patient participation in research. And social participation in the widest sense is patient or prospective patient participation, right? And I think, like anything, you gotta try things out. You have to get experiences. How can there be meaningful contribution of stakeholders along the way, including the final recipients, but including also activist groups and all that. And we are still in a learning process. And I think what's very helpful really is to make sure we understand the motivations, we understand also what's the objectives along the way. A basic research program will have other challenges for a patient to participate than, let's say, how do we get a vaccine program implemented, right? And so how can we do this? But it is very clear that if we want to be successful, we need it, and we need it at every stage. And so at the moment, we are learning what works for everyone and what doesn't work. And so some things go really wrong, but some things are surprising wins. And so it's always, and this is why it's so important to actually do the postmortems, so to speak, to actually look at, okay, what went wrong, what went well, and how can we use that to move forward.
Thank you very much. We were wondering whether there's one further urgent question that we could address before rounding up for today. I got now 2, 3 hands. Who was first? Lady.
She was first.
So maybe the lady in front.
Shall I just shout? Can you hear?
I think it's not good for the online people. We're a hybrid session, so if you will take those seconds. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Bronwyn Hennig. I'm the director of the Global Health Policy Lab based here in Berlin. My question is around translating policy into practice, or translating research evidence into policy and practice. And many researchers have, bright ideas. They're driven by their curiosity to solve problems, but they don't think much, or they don't think in a concrete manner about how the evidence that they produce gets translated into policy and practice. I wondered whether you could comment on whether you think involving policymakers at the design or development stage of research proposals and conduct of research is a conflict or a benefit, and why?
Thank you very much. So quite a challenging last question that we'll have as well. And I'm looking at the table very much away from here and was wondering, Filomena, would that be a question you would want to take up?
Yes, I can try and then let the others take. Being from a policy think tank, I would say there are pros to it, especially when we're speaking about this whole move towards interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach. If you are to have a policymaker in the room, he's more likely to be able to open doors to another ministerial sector. So much as you're working, say, on human health, and then you realize, okay, this problem may also be a One Health approach, then you can easily, with his colleagues, bring in another person. So I guess for access, it's always a way as well. And maybe as well for the budgeting of if you need to have an outreach, that the person in policy, be it a traditional leader, local leader, minister, is aware about what it would take for the research to be disseminated. Because I think researchers work on something, then a product is published or not published, but what happens afterwards? You need to have a good plan of how to get it to the public. And I think the earlier you have this involvement of policymakers, it's much easier to have this dissemination plan, I think, concretized in a way. Yep. Those are my 2 points. Okay. Maybe Isabel.
Maybe in complement, I'm not sure it's always a good idea to have the policymaker and the researchers work closely together from the beginning. But a slightly different question is, do you need researchers in political science to work with their other colleagues in order to define both the research project and have some idea as to how it can or cannot be translated into policy making? I think it's, and my answer to that question would definitely be yes. Another point is once you have the research results, I think you absolutely need experts to translate it into a vocabulary format that policymakers can use. And that's a competency in itself, and I don't think researchers are going to develop it. And it's a bit the same when 20 years ago, we had the question, how can we get our researchers to be experts of patents? And the answer is we can't. We need
okay,
experts
very good
of patents.
controversial point. I'm going to come in because we've been given various signals. So, so I'm going to, you had a very clear answer there. The name of this session was to Bridging Policy and Research and about the translation of the new EU Global Health Strategy into action. Okay, so we've had a super discussion. I'm going to try, right? So I think we've seen a lot of this is around trust, right? A lot of the ability to address global health issues is around trust and is around rebuilding trust in the current era where we're at, and the EU Global Health Strategy fits into that. I think we've seen and we've heard that science is a key aspect of trust, and that it's not just any type of science, but I think that we've heard a lot about in the question around social participation, and a lot of the comments were around that, is also around interdisciplinary research, around transdisciplinary research, bringing different skills together, including to enable the bridge of policy and research, but also to have the kind of research that's transformative for the global health questions we're seeking to address. And I think there is a translational aspect in this field which leads from the basic sciences, from the life science, from the vaccine development research. We need to really operationalize that and bringing that to fruition. And that I want to take, because this session was by Glora, I want to say there is a role very clearly in that then for the research platforms, right? For research platforms such as Glora and our colleagues in neighboring countries for bringing this type of research together. And then we have this new strategy. So I think we've had a lot of clarification around what the new strategy enables to do. We've seen where it makes sense to have more effective actions by having alignment between member states. I've also very clearly understood that the strategy is also the member states, so it's our strategy as well as being the EU strategy. The question where the money is coming from, to me, I didn't get completely clear answer. Veronica at one point said there's not going to be more money, so we're going to be more efficient. So I think the EU strategy and how it will influence research is really around research priorities and how we can align these and create efficiencies around this. So I would like to thank a fantastic panel of very different perspectives, and I'd ask you to join me in thanking them. I think from our side as research networks, we in this field, we can offer that we will seek to bring together researchers, that we will work with you, and that equitable partnerships are certainly going to be at the sort of heart of our mandate, and we'll do our bit for facilitating them in global health. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, the panelists, and thank you for being such an engaged audience. I apologize that we didn't get to all the questions, but maybe you can grab one or two people as they're walking out of the room and enjoy the rest of the World Health Summit. Thank you.
Thank you.